All right, welcome to the November 17th, 2023 edition of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports, sumersports.com, where you can go for the best in football analysis. This Friday show, normally what we do is go through the games. I talk about, the point spread, sometimes the total. We'll talk a little bit about kind of like what the angles are for the the people I'm hearing about in the markets and all this kind of stuff. But I don't think that we can actually get through we can get through a good show today without talking about what we just heard out of Cincinnati, the 5-1-3. Joe Burrow is out for the season with what it appears to be a wrist injury, a wrist injury that he kind of had going into last night's game. Throws a touchdown pass to Joe Mixon. They have a 10-7 lead. Lamar Jackson had been on the sideline with his own injury. Just think about the live betting sort of situations that were given rise to there, and he ends up going out. Jake Browning, the longtime journeyman backup that has really never stuck around in the NFL until now, out of University of Washington. He comes in, moves the ball a little bit, gets a 4th and 3 right around the 50-yard line, down 4 points, with a chance to kind of go take a lead or at least cut the lead down to 1. The Bengals kind of wuss out there, punt the ball away. And as is poetic, in my opinion, and what should happen is the Ravens took that ball, drove it down, and took a 21-10 lead over the Bengals that went into halftime. This basically sinks Cincinnati. Let me show you guys a little bit of what we're cooking up at sumersports.com a little bit here so that you guys can get an idea of where we're going to be able to offer you guys some value. I'm just going to go to the front page a little bit, but then we'll go and talk about Cincinnati here momentarily. You go to the front page of sumersports.com. You have kind of all of our articles. I have my Football Friday where I talk about the chances that the Lions get the 1 seed, as well as Trevor Lawrence and his struggles. But notice here, we have not seen Cincinnati fall off that much. Even though they started off slowly, we had them going into the game as the 7th best team in the NFL, even after a loss against Houston at home. That's going to significantly reduce without Burrow. If you go to our league page here, again, this is prior to last night's game. So when you look at Cincinnati, had a 43.4% chance to make the playoffs, a 10.5% chance to win the division title. After this week and after, they had the 4th toughest schedule moving forward, right? So even if you had something like Jake Browning come in and give you something like what Josh Dobbs is doing, notice here when you look at the strength of schedule for the Minnesota Vikings, this is a team with a strength of schedule sort of more near the middle of the pack of the NFL. And after 2 games playing the NFC South, this is a much different story for the Cincinnati Bengals without Joe Burrow. This is going to be very difficult for them to win game by game, and as well as going to be difficult for them to even get in the playoffs. I think now you really have to look at Baltimore being the favorite in that division, Cleveland possibly being scrappy with Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Phillip Walker in there, much better backups than what the Bengals have. And of course, the Steelers at 6-3 are still a team that can do something. We have our normal suspects here. We have Beat Gamer. Gus Edwards going to single-handedly stop that Lamar MVP campaign. Yeah, that's been interesting from a touchdowns perspective. Michael Ackerland, Bengals defense has been so rough this year, depending upon turnovers. That is a very interesting notion. They have been giving up high explosive play rates, as far as, losing Von Bell, losing, more importantly, Jesse Bates, who's now playing over here in Atlanta. It hasn't been as good, for that Bengals defense, who has been pretty good historically at avoiding giving up those big plays. So that's one where I think that they really might struggle. Zay just says, look at the Steelers' schedule, LOL. They might win that division. Look, I think anything's possible because you just don't know about the health of Lamar Jackson all the time. He stayed healthy so far this year. He hasn't missed a ton of time, but there's always a ticking time bomb. It wasn't even until December until he got hurt last year. and then we never saw him again. In 2021, it was a similar thing, and so forth. We got a good, here's our resident Ravens fan, Wiggum 513. Just tuned in. Hopefully Kohler and likely with the 4 fourth rounders can come in handy. Yeah, there's also the Mark Andrews injury, which somebody called. I think Mark Andrews worth about half a point a game, maybe depending upon the matchup, maybe a full point. So that's going to hurt the Ravens as well. Again, I have a hard time thinking Kenny Pickett can win enough games to outlast the Ravens in this division. But now a division that once saw as many as 4 teams in the playoff race at any time in the AFC now probably is going to top out at 2. And it's depending upon whether or not the Steelers can hold off the Browns or vice versa, because I do think the Ravens are not a lock to win the division, but they're certainly a good bet at this time. So that's a little bit about the Bengals. Not happy necessarily with that result, as far as, you just like to see the league play be a little bit better than what it has been. We're going to move on to this week's games. We are going to use odds from my friends at Pinnacle Sports. Pinnacle Sportsbook does a really good job of, taking big limits if you live in appropriate countries, but also just giving you the sharpest lines. We probably want to move these to American odds for our friends here. We cleared the cache on the website, so it completely reset there. So yeah, let's talk firstly. Dallas goes to Carolina. They're laying 10.5 total on this game in Cowboys Panthers. 42, a pretty low total considering what you're getting with that Dallas offense. But the Carolina offense has not been good basically all year. Bryce Young has really struggled. This is another game where, if you're looking from an IDP or a prop market perspective, you look at the Parsons of the world, you look at the Lawrences of the world. No Leighton Vander Esch. He was injured. He is out for the season. So maybe Carolina can come up with some modicum of a run game there, or maybe some stuff down the middle of the field. But this is a game where when you look at it from a pure mathematical perspective, it makes some sense that where you're going to go here on the point spread at 10.5. Let me see where I have it currently as things stand with respect to injuries and everything. I make it 10.5 as well. So, and it was earlier 10 this week. So I feel good about that number. It's moved, basically to where I am. So really no opinion there. I like what Dallas has done. I like what Dallas has done insofar as getting the ball to CeeDee Lamb. Rico Dowdle has been better than Tony Pollard. And so moving off of him has been, I think, profitable for this team. And I think that they probably end up moving off of him even a little bit more into the future. But this is, it's certainly a situation where Dallas offensively was in a put up or shut up situation and has put up, especially in the case of getting CeeDee Lamb the ball. Let's talk about this next game. This is a Tennessee Titans getting 7 minus 114 at Pinnacle, going to Jacksonville. Jacksonville laying 7 plus 102. So it's kind of a 6.5, depending upon sort of how you look at it. I wrote in my article, sumersports.com. I will get to this answer, Howdy. Very good question. Sumersports.com. I talked about Trevor Lawrence. I was on the football show on ESPN with Kevin Clark, one of the better ones out there as far as journalists that are covering the league. And prior to my appearance, Derek Klassen, who is a quarterback guru, basically was talking about Trevor Lawrence. He was talking about how bad the offensive line was, how the receivers aren't doing much, and so forth. There are a lot of excuses one can make for Lawrence, but the fact of the matter is, it came out, yesterday that Doug Peterson, basically said that Trevor Lawrence's knee is one of the reasons why he's not playing well. And given that they just came off of their bye, they don't have one the rest of the year. Don't have an offensive line that's going to particularly get better. I think, you can maybe make a case for Anton Harrison evolving, with the times. But for the most part, Trevor's on his own here. And Jacksonville is an easy schedule, bottom 10 schedule in the NFL moving forward. So I think that there's some chance there. I think that they'll still win that division. We make it about a 62% chance at Sumer Sports. But I just don't know if you can buy into them week to week. And they're laying a full touchdown. They're laying a full touchdown, at home against Tennessee, a team that can be spunky with a quarterback that it generates a lot of variance. To me, I just can't get there. I make this game, if I look at it here between Jacksonville and Tennessee, I make the game -6.5. So kind of right there. So I guess +7, if you get it flat, would certainly be a value for Tennessee. I'm just really hard as far as variance is concerned. I'm hard pressed to go and take down, really any opinion on Tennessee until I can see more of Will Levis, who's been okay, not perfect. Michael, great point here. That feels like the Jags are taking 0 shots downfield offensively. That certainly I think is the perception. Calvin Ridley has only had one game of over 40 yards since opening day. And that was the London game against the Bills during the morning of week 5. It's not been great. Ridley, everybody was sort of edging out over him about, his preseason prowess, going after some defensive backs in Jacksonville. It just has not materialized, which is unfortunate. Obviously, Dimitroff drafted him. So I always am rooting for him. The one thing that has been good for the Jags went a little pear-shaped last week, but they have been very good defensively, a top 10 team in terms of EPA allowed. I think that they'll finish there because of how easy the schedule is. But you also have, really, really solid play out of Foye Oluokun, Devin Lloyd. Those players have been great. Josh Allen has been overshadowed Trevon Walker at the line of scrimmage for this team. So an interesting game. For the second straight, though, I don't think I can advise at current numbers. This one I can, though. Pittsburgh going to Cleveland. Cleveland -1, -113 or -119 on the money line. It's really hard to handicap this game because I do not like – it's hard for any model to get on to the Steelers in a game either now or the last 3 years. Before Deshaun got hurt, I made the game let me look here. Before Deshaun got hurt, I made the game minus 4.5, 5, which was off market even before we got the news. Now, our mathematical model, I'm going to answer this question here by how.d here. We made actually Deshaun Watson, given everything we know from scouting data and traditional analytical data, we made him 1.8 points above kind of like an average backup on a neutral. The market moved, we'll say 2 points, but it's not necessarily quite through. It's not a gliding 2 points because it went through or off of 3. But it looked like we're fairly right here. What we do, and it's I'm going to keep this a little bit opaque just because hopefully one day people will find this information valuable as well. But we have a scouting team at Sumer, like legitimately a bunch of people who are formerly of NFL teams. They go and put a number on a player. We also have our analytical data, so pressures and all that kind of stuff that we get from a place called Fade the Noise, which is a great data provider, up and coming data provider. And we match those together. We use, basically how valuable each action is. So, for example, a sack is worth 1.8 points to the defense, 1.85. And you sort of go through all the different permutations of what things can be worth. And it comes out. Now, there's a lot of caveats with that number. Basically, you have to say, well, on an average team against an average team, average scheme versus average scheme. I know Rob Pizzola, one of my good friends, he, a professional bettor will say, it's sort of hard to make power rankings because it's very much a styles make fights league, and that's where he's gained a lot of an edge. But you do like to kind of have these rules of thumb, just especially for somebody like me who's a content creator, and people want to ask sort of like what the true impacts of a guy like Mark Andrews will be, and having that answer is certainly of value. Moving on, the Arizona Cardinals, they're going to get 5.5 at Houston. This is a game I make it more like 6, and we did see it hit 6, but we've also seen some market resistance whenever the thing has gotten to 6. So yeah, 5.5. I don't early week it was at 5. It got down to 4. All those numbers below basically 5 or lower, I would have, I liked. I know that there was a really respected bettor who's been on Houston a lot this year that decided to put his or her, bets in on Houston this week, and that because the market respects this person, it moved quite a lot, but there's been a little bit of buyback. Look, I just don't think Arizona is that good. I think that beating Atlanta at home in an emotional game where your quarterback comes back for the first time in over a year is not necessarily predictive of future success. Houston has, their issues. They have injuries at wide receiver, injuries at the offensive line almost seemingly every week. The defense, has had its moments as far as giving up big plays and needing a lot out of their quarterback, but the quarterback has delivered. And I think as far as Arizona is concerned, we're talking about a defense that has not been good all year. And so I think Stroud will feast on this team. And I think that, Arizona doesn't really, if Kyler can't do some of the really stupid stuff that he has been doing this year, and I mean stupid in sort of like the positive way, then I don't necessarily know if Arizona's be able to stay in this game. So that's one place where I disagree a little bit with the market. How good questions throughout the chat. So is there any counterfactual stuff like how he is out with will the team pivot and do X? There's certainly questions like you don't just say a player is worth X. You have to have usage percentages and stuff like that. And in some cases, I know some modelers have it, usages when they do, this kind of scheme versus that kind of scheme. And again, you can sort of glide between those two extremes. Basically, just say average versus average when it comes to scheme and stuff, or you can get really granular about how you think that this team is actually going to deploy this player in this situation. And both of those really add some value to the situation with respect to just like rules of thumb, but also truly trying to pin down what the true price of a game should be. The Vegas Raiders getting 13 against Miami. The 13 for Miami is -114, so it's juiced even towards the Dolphins. Like I don't get this one in the sense that you're basically saying that the Raiders are similar to like the Daniel Jones Giants, which I get from a quarterback perspective. Aiden O'Connell has not been the most impressive player I've ever seen, but he's also, engineered winning games the last 2 times. But Miami, this is the kind of team that Miami kills, right? A team that, they're going to make the Vegas Raiders wear their black uniforms in the unshaded side of the field. And, they're going to, and when they get a lead, Miami is really tough to beat. Who was on Buffalo early in the season to win the Super Bowl, to win the division, given, that the Bills have the hardest schedule in the NFL moving forward. To me, this is the beginning of Miami winning their first division title since 2008. I can't lay 13. I'm not going to take it, with the Raiders if I could. I make this thing closer to right around 10 or so. But I also understand that there are some nonlinearities here, specifically how the Dolphins play from ahead. And I think that over time, you're going to see a dissipation in O'Connell's effectiveness, given how inexperienced he is. So that's just my take on that game. I don't know, other than from a fantasy perspective, I don't find it all that compelling. And then speaking of the Giants with Tommy DeVito, but Danny, go to Washington. Washington's laying 9.5. At Pinnacle, it's -10, but +112. I make this game Washington -8.5. So there is some value, I think, on the New York Giants here. It's just really hard for me with DeVito. The thing that you're banking on, if you like that, and I know a lot of sharp people who like that play, is the turnovers and the mistakes that Howell can make. The last time Howell played the Giants, he was sacked 6 times, threw an interception, probably should have thrown a pick 6 and kept that game from truly being close. They lost 14-10. And that was the last time Howell played pretty poorly, because ever since then he had a great game and a loss to the Eagles. He had he's had a couple good games in a row after that, where people have started to people have started to take respect for Sam Howell. And I'll say this: I still think Sam Howell long term is a backup in the NFL. I still think on a perfect team, he's a great backup quarterback, but that doesn't mean I'm right. And I think that there's, a chance, given how good his arm is, how good his athleticism is, that if he can figure out the sack issue, which again, this is the whole part of the thesis, no one really, it's difficult for players to do that in the NFL. Then I think he's got a shot. And over the last 3 games, either he or Eric Bieniemy have done a tremendous job of keeping him upright. Christopher, good question here, or sorry, good comment. Eager wrecked Twitter last night. I did. Look, it just came to me. In fact, one of my friends in the industry, whose best friend is my favorite comedian, or one of my favorite comedians, told me that he would have found that funny, and that was as good of an honor as I've ever would have asked for. So that was fun. That game sucked, and so I'm glad that we had something we could all collectively laugh about. Look, I know Carissa, like the big issue I have with the Carissa Thompson thing is just more of like the braggadocio of it. Like, look at all you schmucks that have to work hard and grind out, your quotes and do it the right way. And look at me, who doesn't even have to, like, the whole thing about like, I haven't been fired yet for this take. So I'm just going to, it's like, can you flaunt your privilege anymore in anybody's face? Like, I feel like that was just so bad. The football industry is so saturated. The football industry is so difficult to get into that I think that you do people a disservice, especially the ones that are up and coming, to project that. And so, yeah, I it was sad. I've never been a huge like fan or unfan of her, but like I just thought that was a slap in the face to all the people who do the job well, and now people won't trust those people who do it well. Matt says my favorite tweet was the Eric Jesus Christ response. Yeah, all-time tweet the other night, Eric. Thank you. Well, look, they don't pay me for my tweets though, so we have to move on. Well, they actually do. Elon does, but my the world broadly, my employer doesn't. So we have to move on. I don't really think you can take the Giants in this game. Maybe when they're up 7-3 with 10 minutes left in the third quarter, I'll be kicking myself for saying that you couldn't take them. But it's hard for me to see. It's really hard for a team to win when they can't move the football, and the Giants, I have a difficult time moving the ball. Speaking of two teams who, relative, I think, to expectations, have a hard time moving the ball sometimes. The Chargers go to Green Bay. They're laying 3. I believe this is their first time in Green Bay since they were the San Diego Chargers in 2015 with Phillip Rivers. The Packers played another inspired effort, another, maybe inspired is the wrong word, but another close game that they could not get over the hump with last week. So they moved to 3-6. The Chargers are 4-5 and have a worse record than the Vegas Raiders right now after a loss to the Detroit Lions, where they simply could not stop the Lions, despite the fact that that Justin Herbert played a phenomenal game. When I look at this game, this is another one where when I look at my numbers, I make it 2.75. So I'm right there. If anything, it's Green Bay with the home field advantage and some stuff there. But I'm still waiting on injury stuff with Rashawn Gary, who that tweet where he said he kind of hurt something. I don't know if I can still be confident in Green Bay if they don't have Rashawn Gary. The Chargers, look, this team, playing through, what another Justin Herbert injury. We make them the 12th best team in the NFL, but they have just a 23% chance to make the playoffs. That's exactly who the Chargers are, right? A good team, but ultimately this time of the year, they're drawing dead almost all the time. So that's unfortunate. I'm interested to see Eckler here. I do think there was a person sort of giving away props, throughout the week, and Eckler at 55.5 for rushing yards was a play that this person gave out. I think that if they give him the carries, this is not a team that does a really good job of stopping the run. You see it now. Yeah, it's 55.5 at its nadir, basically market wide. That to me does feel like the kind of game that's going to be played. So if you're in like if you do some of those like drafters or underdog or prize picks things, like I think that's a good look. If you can get that even at 55.5, I think Eckler, if he gets the carries, is going to get the yardage against this Green Bay defense. Okay, here's another question. Dr. EE, back to the Burrow yesterday. Would the betting markets have had any signal that he was injured going in? If people had that info, would the odds on Baltimore shorten with the bets from sharps at full limits? 100%. If that information was clear. And look, that game opened 3.5, got to 4, got bet down to 3.5, and then closed an expensive 3.5/4. So there was some movement towards Baltimore, but if Burrow is like legitimately injured, it's going to be a much bigger move than that. So I think that's been, I think that's where a lot of the consternation is like there wasn't a ton of information on Burrow. We've seen quarterbacks who have played injured. We also don't have the probable designation anymore. I think that is another thing, including the third quarterback, which they rectified this year. I think that's a way in which that's a way in which sort of the league has blundered a little bit on some aspects of what they're trying to do as far as helping gaming. Remember, people who bet or play fantasy watch football four times as many games as people who don't. And so the NFL, instead of thumbing their nose at people who like to have a little bit more than a rooting interest in a game, I think that they should embrace them. Okay. Chicago is catching money here against Detroit. This thing's down to +8, -115 on Pinnacle. Detroit laying 3, +103. This thing, is closer to double digits before. You saw the Justin Fields news that kind of moved it out towards Chicago, but you've seen mostly Chicago money come in, and hence this line move for basically the majority of the week. When it comes to Detroit, I make this thing -10, so I was more with the opening number there. So if anything, I would lay the points with Detroit. And this has been a spot where Detroit has really been the team that you want to back. They were favorites against Atlanta and won comfortably. They're favored against Tampa Bay. They won comfortably. They were small favorites against Green Bay. They won comfortably. The games where they've either not won comfortably or lost have been bet against decent football teams. Kansas City, they won on opening night, won by 1 point. And then Seattle week 2. They were favored in that game, I think, by 4.5 by the time it closed. They lost that game in overtime. And then against the Ravens, they were 3-point dogs and they got murdered by Baltimore. Every other game they've been, except with the exception of last week where they've been favored, they've come out and kind of tea kettled the other team. Last week they had multiple double-digit leads in that game and just had to grind it out because of how good Herbert was at the end. But for the most part, this Lions team takes care of business. So do I see a situation where it's close? Yeah, the game between the Lions and the Bears in Soldier Field last year was close. It was won by 1 point by the Lions. But they've mostly taken care of business at home in these games against teams that they're better than. Jacksonville last year, Chicago last year, Minnesota last year. A team, this year was again Atlanta and teams like that where they've come in and just taken care of business. I think that Detroit does that this week. Next up, Tampa Bay getting 11.5. San Francisco laying 11.5. San Francisco -116, so it's closer to a 12. I make this game, closer to a 10 again. So again, I'm having a hard time getting out to some of these favorites. Tampa Bay is off of a victory against Tennessee where they were very impressive. Kept Will Levis out of the end zone for most of that, for the duration of that game. And made some big plays. Baker Mayfield wasn't great by any standard, but he was good for him. And that was enough. I don't think that that's going to be the case against San Fran. In San Fran, I do think that the Niners figured a little bit out last week. They kind of murdered a Jacksonville team that's kind of similar in some ways to Tampa, but have a better quarterback even. And so that was impressive. I can't get there with the Bucs here. I do agree that the Niners, we're talking about that division, even though they're tied with Seattle. I do think that they are the class of that division moving forward, which should be interesting to watch. Okay, let's go to another one of the afternoon games. Seattle laying 1, but +110 to the Los Angeles Rams. This was a game that was closer to 3 when it opened, but we saw the Matthew Stafford news. And so we saw the Matthew Stafford news, and this thing has moved closer to a pick 'em. In fact, On Pinnacle, the Rams are favored, minus 118 on the money line to plus 101 for the Rams. I like Seattle in this one. This is one that I talked about on one of the Hammer shows. I just think, Seattle figured out some of the red zone woes last week. They figured out some of the issues associated with getting the ball to Lockett and Metcalf. Now, both guys are banged up still, so who knows what kind of, health you're going to get out of both guys. But I think Seattle figured a few things out. I think Stafford against the blitz this year has not been as good as in previous years. I think it's something like 6.0 yards per pass attempt. And if anybody read the book, Football is Numbers Game by Matthew Collar, which is just back here, there was an anecdote in it where I told former Bengals safety Ricardo Allen before the Super Bowl against the Rams that he asked, basically, what should we do with Stafford? And I go, don't blitz him. And he turns into Joe Montana, who's blitzed. And I think in that Super Bowl, he was something like 9 of 10 for 128 and a touchdown or something when the Bengals inadvisedly blitzed him. So that's different now. And what's interesting is the Seahawks have a way, I think, to capitalize on that decline there. Witherspoon, obviously Adams. Mafe has been very good rushing the passer. The Minnesota kid from a couple of years ago in the draft. So I think Seattle's defense, even again, and they're coming off of a situation where the Rams kind of tea kettled them in week 1, 31-13, I believe was the final score. And so there's an element of okay, does LA just match up better with Seattle? I just think Seattle played poorly in the first game. Then we'll come out here in LA in the second game and win, in fact, keep pace with the Niners, and they need to for that division. Lastly, in that window, you have the Jets getting 7.5 minus 118. The Bills again laying 7.5 plus 105. People have backed up the truck for the Bills for the last 6 weeks, and they've gone 0-6. And the people that have faded the Bills have made a lot. I've liked Buffalo all year. But there's that statement, of course, that, the market can remain inefficient longer than you can remain solvent. And I think that there's an element of the Bills where at some point you got to be able to score. And there's fundamental issues to the NFL this year insofar as defense is giving up not even chunk plays, but just consistent, successful plays, but not giving up the big play and not giving up the scores. And Josh Allen, combines a lack of patience with a penchant for turnovers that I think is the elixir for a team like Buffalo, who is still tremendous as a football team, in my opinion, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Defense is a little banged up. But it really hasn't mattered. And now they have the hardest schedule in the NFL moving forward. Jets are not really part of that. They have to go to Kansas City. I believe they have to go to, if I remember, they at least have to go to Kansas City. Which will be a tough game for them, but they've won, 2 of the last 3 games they've played there. So I just don't think I got to see it again before I believe it with Buffalo at 5-5. I just need more out of them. And this week I'm not taking it with the Jets because Zach Wilson can go a whole game without making a ton of mistakes, throw 1 interception and they lose and fail to cover. And, that's unfortunate. But I will, but I certainly will, monitor Buffalo going forward. And I think the fact that they're still a touchdown favorite against the Jets team that still has playoff aspirations is telling as far as what the market still believes about the Bills. Sunday Night Football, the Vikings are getting 2.5, minus 118, and Denver laying 2, plus 103. Money line is minus 128 for Denver. This is a game where if either team had played somebody else, this would be a perfect fade situation, right? Where you have the Vikings coming off of 2 really improbable wins with Josh Dobbs against bad NFC South teams and 5 wins overall, although 2 of those wins, Green Bay was drawing dead when they were, and Chicago, that wasn't a particularly impressive game. So, I think the impetus was wanting to fade the Vikings. Josh Dobbs is still a guy who's averaging far less than average in terms of yards per play, EPA, all this kind of stuff. But then they face a Denver team that won a mistake-filled game against the Bills. Probably shouldn't have. Missed a field goal, but the Bills had 12 men on the field. They beat a Kansas City team. Now, look, they did a lot of stuff to make Kansas City fail, but it was more of a Kansas City loss than it was a Denver win. And so you get to this game and both teams are kind of riding high. The Broncos on a 3-game winning streak, the Vikings on a 5-game winning streak. And you're thinking, okay, I need to fade one of these two sides. And I'm going to fade the Vikings more. I make the game more closer to 3.5. Javonte Williams has been great. The Vikings are going to be without Jordan Hicks, who had a shin surgery. They brought back Anthony Barr. Who knows how much he has left. They're still not that sturdy against the run. They're feasting off a lot of bad quarterbacks. I think Russ has firmly gotten into that conversation of not being that bad anymore, especially considering they limit the volume at which Russ is asked to do things. And I think that just makes him, by definition, far more effective than he otherwise would be. So I like Denver in this one. I did an interview with my hometown TV station at Carol 11 to talk about how much the Vikings are benefiting from luck. I love Kevin O'Connell's approach to coaching football. I think he's coach of the year. Kwesi is obviously he's a friend, and I think the trades that he's made and the draft picks he's had since the 2022 draft, which wasn't as golden for him, have all been on the up and up. That doesn't mean that I necessarily think that they should be favored or should even cover in this game this weekend. So this is one where I'm high on the Vikings overall, but I'm not necessarily going to back up the truck and take them here. It also looks, as Matt says, looks like JJ is out again, and you combine that KJ Osborne, could have played last week, might play this week, but if your three receivers are Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, and Brandon Powell, that's cute, but it's not winning any games, especially when Patrick Surtain is on the other side of the ledger for the Broncos. All right, last but not least, Philadelphia. This is the game of the week. Philadelphia getting 2.5, going to Kansas City -2.5, -117. The -2.5 is juiced towards closer to a 3. You are seeing some 3s now in markets, and I think that's probably a reasonable look. I make the game 2.5, so professionals have liked the 3 anytime that they've gotten it, and so that's something to sort of monitor. Patrick Mahomes under a field goal, though, has almost always attracted bettors. And I think in this particular game, it makes sense, but the matchups I don't think are as good for Kansas City in some spots as they were last year. Trey Smith, Creed Humphrey, if you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, which aren't perfect, but I think are pretty good at the line of scrimmage, they have declined significantly from last year, which means the interior for the Eagles, the Jalen Carters, the Jordan Davises, the Fletcher Coxes, they might have more success than they did in the Super Bowl. In fact, if Kansas City's turf is different than Arizona's turf, maybe they'll have ultimate success in terms of rushing. The 2 tackles have been better as the season progressed, but the wide receivers have not largely found their way. Rashee Rice had another touchdown in the game against the Dolphins, but only had 2 targets. Marquez Valdez-Scantling had an encouraging game against the Chargers, but has been his sort of normal 1 catch, 2 catch kind of guy the last couple of games. And then Sky Moore, had made some plays against Miami, but for the most part is no-showed this season. So can they take advantage of an Eagles secondary that has been kind of shaky this year? I don't know. No Nakobe Dean, linebackers like Nicholas Morrow and Cunningham off the waiver scrap. You might see some stuff to Kelsey. And you might just see Andy Reid pull a great game out of his hat, which he's certainly capable of. He's one of the best, if not the best, coaches in the league. But when I look at this, I think there are a lot of assumptions about this game, which is total in the mid 40s at 45.5. The Super Bowl had a total of 50.5. So this game 5 points lower from a projected scoring standpoint, and I think that reflects a decline in some of the things that the Chiefs had advantages in that they don't have advantages anymore. If you flip over to the other side, Hurts has been great. Our own Sean Syed wrote an article about him and how he's been one of the most valuable players in the league. It hasn't looked pretty. In fact, I think a lot of really smart people are looking at him and saying, is he still running as fast and all that? Well, AJ Brown has over 1,000 yards, so he's clearly distributing the ball well enough to garner some of these things. If they run the football, the Chiefs are a bottom 3 team, bottom 4 team in terms of EPA per play against the run defensively. So I think that, again, this is what's keeping me away from Kansas City as far as, firmly advocating for them. It's just, I think that the Eagles are a very strong team. And I think the Chiefs were stronger than they than they are now when they played them and played them to a 3-point win in the Super Bowl come February. So I'm excited to watch it. Obviously, looking forward to watching the Chiefs play football every single week. But I'm nervous for sure. Dan Bodine says no brace for Hurts this week in practice. Yeah, I mean, look, the guy's a marvel. He wasn't wearing not wearing a brace is good because he has not been fast on the field, and that has been unfortunate for the people that have taken him in fantasy and all that kind of stuff. Perfect. All right, so that's it for this week. I'm excited for what Week 11 has in store. I know last week you guys asked me for my 2 favorite CFL plays. And Michael says here, thanks for doing the show, Eric. Always enjoy the great discourse. Great Cup Sunday. And look, last week I went 2-0. I said Montreal ATS and Winnipeg ATS. Those both hit. Montreal won in a game where they produced 7 turnovers, and it was kind of a no doubter. Even though Toronto, I believe, outgained them. I had to look, but last time I checked, they outgained them. Montreal had a pick 6, had a kick return. Anytime that Toronto wanted to come back, they made it tough. I make the game 5.5. I think in some markets it's 7.5 to 8.5, and in fact it opened 6.5. So there's people that certainly disagree with the way I've handicapped the game. But yeah, I'm a fan of Montreal ATS in this game, but I do think Winnipeg with Mike O'Shea is a very tough person to bet against. So awesome. Thank you for everybody who's come. Howdy, thanks for the chat. Had Chad Kelly seen ghosts? He was seeing something, but it wasn't players in his own jersey. That's for damn sure. That was a heck of a privilege. Some good Saturday football as well. Go Chanticleers. Yeah. So for the Sumer Sports Show, again, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell somebody about this show. Tell somebody about the Friday show if you like it, especially. I know Thomas is fantastic, but he doesn't like previewing games. And yeah, I'm, and we got very difficult here. One of my favorites is Go Bills E. This is a great week. Tell somebody that you care about this show so that we can continue to get the numbers up and continue to increase the great discourse that we have in the chat. Sumersports.com for all your needs as far as statistics and just overall great NFL content. So for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show. Have a great weekend, everybody.